Peace and blessings, everyone. What's going on? This is So Real here, Shield Squad. I'm gonna go ahead and try to zip through this right away. If any of you guys were looking at uh, a little dialogue, a short little dialogue that I did, it was a little under an hour with a brother named Hakah. I would not call him a deacon. Because just according to Christianity, he's not. But that's a whole nother story. Basically, I'm going to be real quick with this. If you guys have not looked at that little dialogue I did, I encourage you guys to look at it. Basically, I had really one premise, and that was whatever he thought about Isaiah 14, it was wrong and it was fulfilled. However, when it came to his questions about the supposed captivity of under the Persians, I first had made my stance clear that, I said in the video that, well, there was no Persian captivity. But then after that, I kept on using the word itself. And I guess I look back at it and I just see that perhaps I just, it was because I really didn't do my due diligence to actually study the time era of that time period in any great detail. I just pretty much always skimmed over it and looked at a few things. But he began to ask me in a debate certain things that I never looked over or studied. And I said to him that I would look over and I would study it, and I would get back to him. Well, I did want to do that in a dialogue, but I kind of thought to myself, well, what if I never really get to fully flesh out my points? So instead, I chose to do a response. So this is my response video to that. Now, for the Christians out there that are listening, you're probably wondering, why is this important? What I'm about to show you in Nehemiah and during the Persian Rule, that's what I call it because it's not a captivity. I'll get into that later. You will have Black Hebrew Israelite groups that literally teach people that whites or non-Israelites, Gentiles will be their slaves. And they will go to Isaiah 14 to prove this. They'll use a whole slew of other scriptures, side arguments such as Obadiah and other things to show that this prophecy has not been fulfilled. Because of that, they're able to say that, non-Israelites, Gentiles will be slaves in the kingdom if they have any kind of salvation. That means if you're not an Israelite, you are going to be a slave and you're going to go into captivity, just as the whites put the blacks through captivity, during the transatlantic slave trade. That is the doctrine that they're pushing out on the street corners. And I've even sadly heard, even in the ISUPK, that the reason why they have white girlfriends and white wives is because they tell them on the street, listen, you are going to be our slaves because of the things that your fathers have done. So you need to come on under us right now and obey the law, statutes, and commandments, and all will be well with you. And people, the women, and of course some of the men, they'll get right into it. This is the same issue with GOCC. This is the reason why you'll see white members among them. And so this is the reason why this has to be addressed. Also, the last reason before I go on, because there's only like 37 slides and that's it. What I'm going to show you is the weakness and the failure of this whole idea of the precept upon precept. I'm going to show you why it fails and how dangerous it is to take one sentence, as the Sicarri have in the video dialogue that we had, which you could look at right now, and how they spun an entire false doctrine off of just simple scriptures like Isaiah 14 and Nehemiah 5 and Obadiah 1. That's all it takes. Just those three. Remove the sentences out of it and, take it away from its context, and boom, you have slaves in the afterlife. Oh, hold on. Let me go ahead and put my phone off of vibrate. Here we go. Yes, and so that's the issue. So I'm going to show you the weakness of that when you actually compare their one sentence doctrines to the chapter they pulled it from, history itself, and just other scholars down through the ages who have, said otherwise, including commentaries. With that being said, let me go ahead and start this. So, this is Isaiah 14 came to pass, no slavery or captivity in the kingdom of heaven. This is my response to the Sicarri. Basically, the Sicarri, if I were to wrap up their position based on the dialogue that, I had with them for about an hour, it goes like this. Israel will take captive the Gentile nations, all non-Israelites, and they will rule over them, and they will be their slaves in Christ's kingdom. Obadiah chapter 1, verses 11 and 12 speak of Edomites in Jerusalem during the Babylonian captivity. Isaiah 14 has not yet come to pass because Persian rule was a captivity and gave no rest for Israel, right? That is their position on it. It has to be that way. And that is the reason why they'll take Obadiah 1 and Nehemiah 5 and twist them. And I'll show you. In Christianity, Israel took Babylonians as servants and handmaids. I forgot the S on servant. Forgive me. Back to Jerusalem during the Babylonian captivity by converting them to become Jews. The converts took them safely back to their land under the authority and edict of Cyrus and helped them rebuild the temple. Isn't that beautiful? Despite the surrounding enemies, like the Horonites and Samaritans and some other people, the Ammonites, right? They mention as trying to stop the rebuilding, and the Jews making slaves of their own brothers. Nehemiah ended both of those troubles, and the temple was completed. And there's things I can't even I don't even have time to even walk through it. You have to study it and just read it yourself. I was reading and seeing how Nehemiah actually started giving to the poor himself. He started financing stuff himself because Nehemiah was made a governor over Judea by King Cyrus. Does that sound like a captivity to you? No, it doesn't. Anyway, it says Persians ruled the Jews, but never oppressed them in any way. Edomites stole their goods during the Babylonian captivity while they were, rounded up in Babylon and carried it back to their land, but they never occupied Jerusalem during the captivity. So, with that being said, let's get into this. Persian rule was not a captivity nor oppression. All of history and scripture prove this, and scholarship affirms this. This is from a book called Hebrews Second Commonwealth, right? And it shows that Hebrews fought in the Persian king's armies during Persia's reign. It says this. It says, Xerxes, the enemy of all heathen temples, having ascended to the Medo-Persian throne in 485 BC, confirmed to the Jews, or the Hebrews, same difference, of Palestine, all the privileges granted them by his father Darius. When he invaded Greece, it is narrated by his contemporary Cyrillus, saying that a body of Hebrew warriors was in his army. Nothing concerning the Hebrews being on record from 515 to 458 BC, it is evident that no events transpired during that time to produce any change or disturbance in the new Hebrew state. That does not sound like a captivity. Now, it's coming from a direct quote from Josephus in his writings called Against Apian, Book 1, Chapter 22. And it says, Cyrillus, also a still ancient writer and a poet, makes mention of our nation and informs us that it came to the assistance of King Xerxes in his second expedition against Greece, right? The kingdom that would eventually oppress Israel. And isn't that something? For in his enumeration of all those nations, he last of all asserts or inserts ours among the rest. When he says, oh man, I actually didn't get the rest of that quote, but I'm definitely going to get it for you guys. If you guys want it, I'll definitely read it out to you on the next time. But it goes to show that Hebrews actually fought in the Persian armies during that time. So you could also see that there was no change or disturbance in the new Hebrew state. What is the new Hebrew state? The new Hebrew state was a state that the Persians had escorted the Israelites back into Jerusalem to rebuild their temple and their state. That's what it was. It says there's no disturbance of it. If there's no disturbance, how can you count this as a captivity or a time of oppression? Also, if you actually look sources, for example, like Elmer W.K., he actually has the source. He wrote a book called Essentials of the Bible, Essentials of Bible History. He says that Cyrus was born a ruler of men. He inaugurated a new policy in the treatment of conquered peoples. Instead of tyrannizing over them, right, and holding them in subjection by brute force, he treated his subjects with consideration and won them as his friends. He was particularly considerate of the religions of conquered peoples. The effect of this policy was weld his subjects to him in a loyalty which made his reign an era of peace. Once again, that comes from W.K. Maud, Essentials of Bible History, page 348 and 49. Now, you have all these other ones over here. I mean, you have a guy named Yisrael Shalem. He pretty much says the same thing. He says that, the Jews remained loyal to the Persians and enjoyed peace and religious autonomy during most of their rule. Also over here, I'm not even the LDS. I don't believe in Mormonism at all. But even the Mormons, when they end up just objectively looking at the history of the time, they mention the same thing. Of course, I'm no Mormon, of course, but I just find it interesting that they just end up looking at it and coming to the same conclusion. The difference is they actually use a psalm to do this, which I'm going to use later. I'm going to use another psalm later. They looked at Psalm 48, and it says Psalm 48 is a song celebrating the restoration of Jerusalem. It shows how Jewish confidence was then revived. Judah developed a simultaneous government or a semi-autonomous government and gradually enlarged their districts. Basically, it said that they remained in peace throughout the duration of the Persian Empire. If you still don't believe me, you can actually look at a guy named Gubaru. He was a Mede. He actually was born in 601 BC. And this is basically what he wrote. To skip time, you guys can pause this and read this for yourselves. But I'm only going to read the part that's highlighted in dark blue. This is what this guy says. This is an actual, artifact quote. It says the city was no longer at war, peace being restored. Cyrus then sent his best wishes to the residents living there. His governor, Gubaru. So that's interesting. So this person is a governor. Then installed leaders to govern over all Babylon. I find it interesting that not only did he reform Jerusalem, but according to Gubaru, a Mede, he actually reformed Babylon as well. So Babylon actually had a reign of peace under Cyrus as well, right along with the Jews. Now, of course, all the sources of this comes from truthnet.org, and their bibliography just goes through all kind of things, a survey of Israel's history, all the men of the Bible believers, archaeology, and archaeology of the Old Testament by Dr. James Borland. This comes from 1976, 2003. You can see that this pretty much has been the case for some time. Also, when you actually have Captivities of the Jews by Smith's Bible Dictionary in 1901, it says the same thing. It says the captives were treated not as slaves, but as colonists. The Babylonian captivity was brought to a close by the decree in Ezra chapter 1, verse 2 of Cyrus, and the return of the portion of the nation under Sheshbazzar or Zerubbabel and Nehemiah. So Israelites were not in captivity under the Persian rule. You even have another source that basically comes from the Blaudy Tenet of Persecution. And this is by Roger Williams. He says that Cyrus and Artaxerxes, both pagans, who gave the Hebrews freedom to worship. You can see Ezra chapter 7 regarding this. But he did not compel any kind of worship. So Nebuchadnezzar was, a bad king for forcing Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to change their names and worship the state god or face that death, right? Or face death. So Roger Williams is credited with the principle of, separation of church and state, right? in his classical work there. And so once again, you can just go to EmmanuelEnid.org, and it basically gives the Bible study notes about the Persians and the Achaemenid Empire, and that's his conclusion on it. Also down here, there's a huge bibliography that goes into this snippet that I took from the JewishEncyclopedia.com. It says that Darius continued the liberal policy, and we're going to get into that policy in a bit, the liberal policy of Cyrus toward the Jews, and favored the rebuilding of the temple at Jerusalem. This comes from Ezra. You can look at this at verses 13 and 17. And I'm going to get into the scriptures in a bit. But right now, I'm laying down the groundwork of history. This is a policy which is in keeping what is known from other sources of the views of his ruler. Also, it says his successors was his son, Xerxes, prominent in the Bible as Ahasuerus, and of the importance of the Jewish history because of his acceptance of Esther to succeed his divorced queen Vashti. This is not a captivity if you're going to take a Jew as your queen over a divorced pagan. Actually influence him, to go ahead and, flourish. That does not sound like a captivity. They were under Persian rule. And also, I think it's funny because it's almost as if Cyrus is almost a type of Christ. Notice that out of all the captivities, this one is not a captivity. It seems to be something different. And this seems to be very Christological. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me continue. I'm almost done with this. Now it's time for some scripture. But before that, I got to set up a few more things. Now, as I do this, we're going to go to Nehemiah chapter 2. I encourage you guys, read the first 6 chapters of Nehemiah and Ezra, who actually lived during the Babylonian exile. You can't make this up. Look at what the scripture is going to paint versus what terrible, poor job Sicarri has done to butcher this narrative. Listen to this. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Why does he say that? Because Nehemiah was his cupbearer, which means he always had to drink the wine to make sure it was not poisonous. This was his job. For how long? I'm not quite sure. Now, I had not been sad in his presence. Okay. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing that you're not sick? There's nothing. Yet, and the reason why he's not sick is because the drink that he drank obviously did not make him sick, right? So therefore it couldn't hurt the king. He said, this is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to God. I prayed to the God of heaven. And by the way, I've looked at commentaries. It says that he actually prayed for like nearly 4 months before he asked the king this question. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me, to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. In other words, according to author Mark Thronveit, he's a professor of Hebrew, of the Hebrew of Old Testament. He says the Persians also financed the restoration of temples though the primary function of these institutions was the administration of Persian policy. I'm going to get into Persian policy in a bit. In Ezra 1 and 6, it describes the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple as mandated and financed by the Persian crown. Nehemiah's commission by the Persian king to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem indicates the strategic importance of the province to the empire in Nehemiah chapter 1, as does a heavy tribute paid to Persia in Nehemiah chapter 9. So even though they actually paid their yearly tax, I mean, think about it. You have a landlord, you got to pay your monthly rent. You have a house, you have to pay your yearly tax. You know, you have a small kingdom that was taken over by another, or you're under the tutelage or rule of another kingdom, and you can, you know, pretty much do whatever you please. Just make sure you pay your yearly taxes. It's funny because, you know, that's what they did. They actually paid taxes to the Persian king. But guess what he did? He only used it to ensure that his peace remained among all the people he ruled. Hence, that's the reason why he gave timber and lumber and financed the rebuilding of the temple. Anyway, the prophet Haggai and Zechariah encouraged the people to rebuild the temple, promising that the, quote, treasure of all the nations would finance the project. Isn't that interesting? This is not a captivity. So, what is Persian policy? Well, according to, you know, a website of an Iranian website, it has a lot to do with the history of the Iranian Empire. It says that many scholars believe that Cyrus's policies find their roots in Zoroastrian teachings. It cannot, however, be ignored that the political considerations played an important role in Cyrus's policy choices. Administering the vast territories of Achaemenid, the Achaemenid Empire, as well as preventing rebellions, required Cyrus to pursue an ideological strategy that enabled him to collaborate with local elites. In other words, the little governors he put over those places. His desire was to do so is one of to remain the reasons, or his desire to do so is one of the main reasons why Cyrus pursued a policy of allowing local customs to continue without disruption and presenting himself as a guardian of all the temples and sanctuaries. Time and again, Cyrus successfully co-opted local clergy and elites, right? The priesthood, the governors, and incorporated them into his new ruling structure. Cyrus would also grant limited local political autonomy in ways that benefited them. For example, historians believe that one of Cyrus's purposes in allowing the Jews to return to Judea was to use them as a barrier between his dominions and those of the Egyptians. Now, that's pretty sharp policy when you want to remain in power, especially when you're still trying to go ahead and conquer other peoples like the Egyptians and the Greeks. That's Persian policy. That does not sound like oppression. That sounds like an idea that maintains peace and flourishing of the people that are under your empire. Who fought against the building of the temple? Because obviously, they're trying their best to make the Persians look like they're harsh people that kept them in captivity. That's what the Sicarri want you to believe. But when you read the text, are the Persians or their soldiers, are they the ones that being the haters? Are they the ones being the oppressors? Who fought against the building of the temple? Let's find out. You have Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite. You can actually read about them in Ezra and Nehemiah. Their names actually come up. That's why, according to Josephus, Sanballat was a satrap of Samaria under the Persians. So, in other words, he had actually been given autonomy, as a local ruler or governor over Samaria. And he was by descent a Kuthian. Now you have Tobiah the Ammonite. Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, it has been usual to regard Tobiah. And by the way, once again, this comes from Josephus, and this comes from other historians as well. Tobiah to regard as a native chief of the Ammonites who, after having been a page or other servant at the Persian court, had been made the head of that nation. But it seems to be quite as likely that he was a servant of Sanballat, who stood high in his favor, gave him counsel, and was prohary. The quote passages are Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 17 and verse 19. Why did they oppose the building of the temple? Why did this Ammonite and Horonite oppose the building of the temple? Let's find out. Now, notice who did not oppose it. The Persians, the people who had the ultimate power ruling over them, they didn't oppose any of this. They backed it. They financed it. So let's see. Why did these two guys of these other little nations oppose it? Let's read Ezra chapter 4, the first 6 verses. This is what it says. Now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were rebuilding a temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers of the house of Israel said to them, "You have nothing to do with us in building the house of our God. But we alone build the house of the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build and bribed the counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. They became haters because Israel said, "Nah, y'all ain't building with us. No." And so that's the reason why the people that are around them, they say, "Oh, we can't help you build? Oh, okay. All right, fine. I'll tell you what. Fine. We're going to make sure you never get that temple up." And they started writing false letters to just read Nehemiah. I'm telling you, they write all these false letters. And then after that, Nehemiah writes something back. Hey, says, "Hey, don't listen to them." And finally he said, "Nope. Okay. Continue the project anyway. I see that they were lying." Like, just read the narrative. This is what they do. Matter of fact, I think in Nehemiah chapter 4 or 5 or 6, it was in one of those chapters, you actually had them like holding a weapon in one hand and a tool to build the temple in the next hand, because they're like constantly, under fear that they would get attacked by some of their people, right? Some, not their people, but their enemies, so as they're building the temple, this is what they had to do for a little while, right? Now this comes from Nehemiah. Listen to this. Nehemiah stops oppression of the poor by his own people, not the Persians. Why do I want you to pay attention to this? Because this is a key highlight when you compare it to how, Sicarri had butchered this. It's funny because he was asked, how is it that, that they're free, but yet under the Persian captivity, they're slaves? And he made it sound like as if the Persians were still holding them as captors and slaves. I mean, that's the biggest spin that I've seen on this verse. But when you read it, this is what it says. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there was also those who said, "With our sons and daughters we are many. So let us get grain, that we may eat and keep alive." In other words, there's a lot of us, so we got to eat. There were also those who said, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine." And there were those who said, "We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards." Right? Remember that yearly tax they gotta pay? Well, they're not having a hard time of it because anything that the king is doing, and he's not asking for much. It seems that this problem of actually getting the king his money is coming from somewhere else. And the issue ain't coming from Persia or Persians. It says, "Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children, yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help it. For other men have our fields and our vineyards. I was angry. I was very angry when I heard the outcry of these words. I took counsel. Now, this is Nehemiah talking. I took counsel with myself and brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are enacting interests. And I looked up the commentaries a lot, and they actually say, 12% interest. That was a lot back in the day. Each from his brother. Persians nowhere to be found. And I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. Yeah, if I was Nehemiah back in the day, I'd have said the same thing. I said, look, man, we just got done being sold to the nations of the Babylonians. We just got back from exile. And now you even yourselves sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. So you got the rich Jews who are nobles, right, and officials, basically enslaving and putting extra interest on their own brethren. And Nehemiah said, no, this is wrong. How hypocritical are we? We just got out of being slaves to the nations, right? We just got out of being slaves to the Babylonians and, of course, the Assyrians right before them. Of course, before them was, Egypt. Come on, this is common sense. That's a problem. Let's continue. Among the rebuilding of the second temple were converts who returned with them from Babylon. This is the part where I want everyone to pay attention to, because this is the part where they often say, well, look, if you read Isaiah 14, you'll see that this has never been fulfilled. And they push it all the way to the end of the eschaton and the coming kingdom of Christ. But meanwhile, Isaiah was written in like 740 BC. Finally, 200-something years later, Babylonian captivity happened in 586. And then after that, they returned with Cyrus, who set them free in 536. And then after that, you find out what really happened through Ezra and Nehemiah. And you'll see that, well, everything that Isaiah written from 740 BC actually came to pass during those times. In other words, 300 years later. Let me show you. Many Babylonians became Israelites and joined as their servants and handmaids. Let me show you. This is Isaiah 14. It says this, for the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel. That lets us know that God did not have to do it. He willingly chose him again, right? And will set them in their own land. So God is going to set them in their own land. I wonder how he's going to do that. Let's find out. And sojourners will join them and will attach themselves to the house of Jacob. Now, let me pause you real quick. That is conversion language. That's proselyte language. If you don't believe me, look at a video that I did where I use about 10 or 12 scriptures, which I could use more when you add Isaiah 53 and 56. I use about 10, 12, 13 scriptures that showed what makes you an Israelite. And guess what's among what makes you an Israelite? Circumcision. They speak of circumcision as, yes, attaching yourself to Israel, joining yourself to the house of Israel. You can look at Judith chapter 14, verses 5 and verses 10, where there was an Ammonite that did that. This language of attaching and joining, it is not foreign in the Old Testament. You can look at Isaiah 56. So that's what that actually means. You know, that they know what they're saying when they do that. It says, and the peoples, I wonder what peoples those are. Well, it actually has to be the peoples that they're being free from, which is the Babylonians. And the peoples will take them. Who's the them? The them is the Jews. Bring them into their place. Oh, so those guys are going to bring them into their place. And so I guess this is the way that God is going to do it, because God said he was going to do it. So I guess he's going to use people to do it. It makes sense. And the house of Israel will possess them in the Lord's land as male and female slaves. Now, you know, I heard this possession language a little bit more in Amos chapter 9. verse 11 and 12, when it speaks about how the Jews would possess the Edomites. And that actually happened with John Hyrcanus. They did possess them when they made them, a part of the nation. They circumcised them, they converted them, actually possessed them. In Acts 15, you actually have James or Peter, I think it's James, he actually quotes Amos 9:11, but he quotes the Septuagint version, which doesn't say Edom, but it says Adam, which means man. That's why other translations say, and he will possess the Gentiles. But yet he just talking about the Edomites. Do this talk about the Gentiles joining the church in Acts 15 who did not need to circumcise themselves and keep the law of Moses to be saved. So this possession, once again, that is not a one-time thing. So it's being very specific about them. Now, it's funny because let's look at this. What is the context of them possessing? It says, they will take captives those who were their captors and rule over those who oppress them. How are they doing this? They're doing this by using their religion to do this, by having them join and attach themselves to Jacob. That is called a rule of righteousness. I'm going to make you guys one of us, and that's how I'm going to rule over you. You're going to become a Jew. You're going to become a Jew. You're going to be proselyted. That's what that means. And I'll show you in the scriptures. First off, look at Gableman's annotated Bible. I found this interesting. It says, Jericho, once under the curse, but now in the place of nearness and blessing, toiled next to the high priest. What grace this reveals. Zachor, well remembered, the son of Imri, the towering one, was also there. What is he talking about? Let's read Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 2. Nehemiah chapter 3, when you read it, it talks about everyone who actually pitched in and built the temple. Guess who was among them? And next to him, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zachor, the son of Imri, built. So you had the people of Jericho even coming in to build. I wonder what they had to do to go ahead and build. Probably the same thing that, all the other converts had to do. They had to convert. So you have their enemies, their supposed enemies their enemies back in the day, that now, hundreds of years later, they're coming to help them build. Didn't it say that the nations would come and help them build up their walls? Well, here it is. Now look at this. In Ezra chapter 2, it talks about the people who came back with them from the Babylonian exile. It says this, the whole assembly was together, 42,360, besides their male and female servants. It says maids in the KJV, of whom there were 7,337, and they had 200 male and female singers. I want you to remember those singers for later on. Nehemiah says the same thing. Why? Because they came back 10 years apart. There were 3 waves of exiles returning. It says the whole assembly was together, same thing. And it says what? They had 245 singers. They're male and female servants, maid servants for the KJV. It says 245 singers, male and female. So there they are. These are the people who came back with them, who converted and joined to Israel. Now look, we're going to go over just a little, this is just to help you out here, to give you just a slight understanding. Look at the prophets that wrote before the exile. Look who wrote during the exile. Look who wrote after the exile, right? So, of course, you have Isaiah, 760 BC. Finished up a lot of his work in 698. Look at Amos, 787. So many. Look at Joel, 800 BC. This is way before any kind of, Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity, right? It's way before those 2 captivities, the ones that we're focused on right now, mainly Babylonian. So you got people writing during the exile and after the exile. Look at Lamentations. They definitely wrote about it. So before, during, and after the Babylonian exile, these are the dates. I hope that gives you a plain view of a picture in your head to show you that these are actual prophecies. And so you have people writing who actually confirm those times, like Ezra and Nehemiah. They confirmed those times during the Babylonian exile. right? Shortly after the exile, when they came right out, you read what happened during that time through those prophetic writings. You read what was prophesied to happen over on the far left. It's that simple. Let's go ahead and continue. Let's go with the Edomites. That's the reason why I showed this as well. Edomites were not in the land during the captivity. Obadiah, Amos, and Lamentations prove this. If you plunder and spoil a land of its wealth, goods, and resources, it means you carry it away to have in your own land. No one sets up in a place they have stripped entirely bare. Scholars have stated Edomites set up on the fringes outside the land at best, perhaps. Anyway, so let's look at Psalms 37 and let's compare it to Obadiah chapter 1, verses 10 through 14. I want you to keep in mind, Obadiah was written in 850. That's a long time. Long before this. Now, this psalm here was written during the Babylonian captivity, according to BlueLetterBible.com. 539 BC was kind of finished out. So Psalms 36 and 37 was, Daniel 7:28, sure. And this is what they say during those times. By the waters of Babylon, they were sat down and wept. And when we remembered Zion, on the willows, they were hung up, were liars, but their captors required us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How should we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Right? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joys. He said, remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare down to its foundations. In other words, they cheered on and said, strip Israel down. I wonder who they were cheering on. They were cheering on the Babylonians. Obadiah actually talks about this account. What happens? He sees it in a vision. And he says to the violence, Jacob, shame shall, and you shall be cut off forever. On that day, you stood alone. That day, strange wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem. You were like one of them. But do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of their distress. Do not enter into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. The only way you can loot the wealth is you have to enter the gate of the people. Terrible Sicarri, Hakah, has said that they entered the gate of the people to stay there, and that's how we know that the Edomites are there. No, you read the text. The text says they went in there and entered the gate to steal the stuff. That's like someone breaking into your house and stealing everything. If you steal everything, you don't stay there to enjoy the stuff you're trying to steal. The person is still there. And even if the person is not there, you don't end up saying, lay it bare, lay it bare, lay it bare, without removing everything from it. Oh, wait a minute. Something happened. Just a second. Just seeing if we got some technical difficulties. Okay. I have no clue what happened. So I'll just go ahead and set this back up. That was strange. Here we go. Just give me a second. Okay. And present to everyone. All right, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. I have no clue what happened, but we're back. So you can see that is a reason why they went in there So what are you going to believe? Are you going to believe Sicarri? Back. Let's look at Amos and let's look at Lamentations, right? Also, I wanted to say that, the part that I forgot, it said, do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. Yes, that's exactly what the Edomites did. If you're going to cheer people on as they, batter down your brother's kingdom, then someone else is going to go ahead also and prophesy that you actually cut off the fugitives. In other words, people are trying to escape from the city, and the Edomites said, "Oh no, you're not your route." And guess who came to snuff them out when they had nowhere to go? The Indians continued things worse over the survivors. Dang, even the people who survived, they handed them over. That's how bad they did. Now, let's go ahead and look at Amos 1, because Amos 1 and Lamentations, talks about some of the things that the Edomites were going to do. But when you actually read Amos, it was written during the time to prophesy about the Assyrian captivity. But look at what it says. I'll read the blue because I know that we're pressed for time. It says, they carried into exile a whole people to deliver them up to Edom. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Tyre, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment, because they delivered up a whole people to Edom and did not remember the covenant of brotherhood. Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and 4 I will not revoke the punishment. I will not revoke the punishment. I'm not going to take it back, because he pursued his brother with the sword and cast off all pity, and his anger tore perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. Look at Lamentations. Obviously, Lamentations was written, during the Babylonian exile by Jeremiah. He's weeping. He's talking about stuff. And this is what he says. He held his hands over all her precious things, for she has seen the nations enter her sanctuary, those whom you forbade to enter your congregation. Wasn't the Edomites, forbade for a little while? They heard my groaning, yet there is not one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. I bet the same people that said, raise it, and lay it bare to the foundations were also glad. They shout about how they're glad they were. You have brought the day that you announced. Now let them be as I am. Wow. So Jeremiah is saying, look, man, you brought the day that you announced on us, because you said if we were going to be bad, this is what's going to happen. Now let our same day happen to these people that are doing this terrible stuff to us. There's your reference. Lamentations. They know exactly who they're talking about. Now, in the context of Edom alone, Obadiah was written in 850 BC and prophesied Edom's sin in the Babylonian captivity in 586. Amos was written in 760 and prophesied twice that Edom would sin against Israel by selling their own brothers to their Assyrian and Babylonian oppressors. And Lamentations was written in 575 and records their enemies plundering their land, and which Judah identifies Babylon and Edom doing. They took Jerusalem's goods and left the land. They didn't occupy a barren Jerusalem. That's what you have. That's what history bears out. Now let's look further into Isaiah 14. Basically, Israel took Babylonians as converts, proselyting them to become Jews, and being their servants and handmaids, they returned with them to Jerusalem and helped them rebuild the temple that Persian King Cyrus gave finance and timber to rebuild. You don't believe me? Let's just go through the evidence in Scripture. Look at Isaiah 14 again and compare it to Ezra chapter 6. What does Isaiah 14 say? It says, and the sojourners will join them and will attach themselves to the house of Jacob. Read Ezekiel chapter 6. This is when the Passover was celebrated because the temple was finally rebuilt. This is what it says. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also by everyone who had joined them and separated themselves in the uncleanness of the people of the land to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread. You know what? I remember in Exodus chapter 12 that there were strangers who wanted to actually come near and keep that Passover when it was first being inaugurated in Exodus. And what did God tell Moses and Aaron to do for the people? He said, listen, if there's any Gentiles, any strangers, any foreigners among you that want to go out and come and keep this, let all his males be circumcised and then let them come near and keep it. So if these people who joined themselves and attached themselves to Israel and the house of Jacob were able to go ahead and keep the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days with joy, for the Lord had made them joyful and turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, so that they aided them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel, then of course these people had to be circumcised too. That's the reason why when it says join them and attach themselves, that was another word for saying that they converted. How did they convert? Circumcision and keeping the law. 12 scriptures show it throughout the Old and New Testament. All started by Genesis 17 with Abraham. If you don't believe me, look at a video that I did called A Presentation for Pastors, and I go over it in great detail. In other words, the Israelites were never a race to begin with. It was races of people, nations of people, united as a people under a covenant faith that God made a nation. This is the reason why it says in Isaiah, this people have I formed for myself. They shall shew forth my praise. I believe that's Isaiah 43. I'm not going to read this, but this is Matthew Henry's commentary basically showing you that, yes, this is what, the consensus shows. This is, look, many should be proselyted to their holy religion and should return with them and induced by, I'm not going to read all this, but it basically shows what I've been shouting the whole time in plain English. This is what it bears out. And what makes this so interesting is that a lot of these commentators say that, you know what, yes, it did happen during the times of Nehemiah and Ezra, but they said that this also is like a spiritual shadowing of a repeat in the, I believe, the church age in the New Testament. So they actually show this is a foreshadow of how everyone would enter the commentary, and also you have Joseph Benson commentary. You have all these historical ways of showing that this was the way they did. They say it is probable that many strangers were made proselytes to the Jewish religion during their captivity, who were willing to go along with them into Judea, there to enjoy the free exercise of their religion. Look at that. And you have Jamison, Fawcett, and Brown. They use Esther 8:17. Esther, that was during the time. Didn't it say that the enemies of the Jews became Jews for fear of the Jews? How do you become a Jew? How do you become a race? That doesn't make sense unless it's not a race, unless it's not some kind of bloodline. Can't change your blood, but this is the way that they're talking. It gets even worse with the Septuagint version of Esther 8:17. It says, and many of the enemies of the Jews were circumcised and became Jews. That shows what I've been saying since Genesis 17 and all the other verses. Then after that, it uses Acts chapter 2 and 17 and all the rest to identify the church age. Even Tacitus, a pagan, in his Annals of History, he says, attest to the fact that numbers of the Gentiles having become Jews in his time. How do you become a part of a race? It doesn't make sense. So, let's see. Commentary, Keel and Delich, and also John Gill's commentary, and they all say the same thing. On their return from the captivity, there would have been an influx of proselytes from the nations who would voluntarily join themselves to those whom they saw favored both by God and man. It says, compare it again to Esther 8:17. And like I said, you guys could pause these and read this anytime you to Cliff Notes, because I know I don't want to be all night. I understand, people get, short-winded. So once again, it just goes through all kind of places where this idea of the strangers joining Israel is echoed all throughout Isaiah. They start now, all of a sudden, they start naming stuff. Isaiah 44, Isaiah 55, Isaiah 56. And they said, but it's prominent. It said, but is prominent in the earlier also with Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. So you have this idea that the nations are joining Israel. How are they going to do that? If you join Israel, that means you become Israel. You become a part of Israel. You are circumcised. You keep the laws, and therefore you are an Israelite. That's what that means. You become Jews. This is how they're talking. This is how people in the Old Testament are actually talking. You have Judith chapter 14, verses 5 and 10. There it is again. And you have a whole bunch of other scriptures I can't think of right now. I found this pretty interesting with Barnes' commentary. He says, if it is asked what evidence there is that any considerable number of the people of Chaldea became Jewish proselytes, I answer that it is expressly stated in Esther 8:17. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for fear of the Jews fell upon them. Ezra indeed has not mentioned the fact that many of the people of Babylonia became proselytes exclusively to the religion of the Jews, but it is in accordance with all that we know of their history and their influence on the nations in which from time to time they were connected, and that they should have become joined to them. He said, we know that in subsequent times, many other nations became proselytes, and the multitude of the Egyptians, Macedonians, Romans, and the inhabitants of Asia Minor embraced the Jewish religion, or became what were called proselytes of the gate. They were circumcised, and they regarded the entitled to a part of the privileges of the Jewish people. And all of a sudden it says, Tacitus, speaking of his time, says that every abandoned man despised the religion of his country, bears tribute and revenue to Jerusalem, whence it happens that the number of the Jews greatly increased. So you have actual historians acknowledging conversion and becoming a part of the nation of the Jews at the time. You have Tacitus saying this. Okay, sorry about that. So let's look at verse 7. The whole earth is at rest. They break forth into singing. Right? At the start and at the finishing of the temple, Israelites and their converts sang so loud that they could be heard greatly from afar, and those hearing could not tell whether they were rejoicing or crying out. Now that's pretty loud and pretty crazy. That sounds like the whole earth is at rest and they break forth into singing. And you know what's funny? That's exactly what happened. You're able to be at rest when the temple was built and it was all said and done. And no matter what all those haters did to stop it, they couldn't stop it. And the temple was rebuilt and they rejoiced. How can you rejoice if you're not at rest? In other words, this was fulfilled. I already showed in the video, you can look at it, where he acknowledged that, you know, it says the whole earth is at rest. I showed that how that word earth actually means land, and it does not mean the entire planet all the time. Also, the context is they break forth into singing. And verse 8 actually says the cedars, right? The fir trees of somewhere. You know, the fir trees are not all over the planet and singing a song. No, they're in a certain land. The whole land is at rest. What land is that? Jerusalem. Why are they at rest? Because they now have their temple rebuilt and they are celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, or not Feast of Tabernacles, but the Passover. And they're rejoicing so loud. Read it for yourself. Look at Ezra chapter 3. Look at Nehemiah chapter 12. Look at what it says. They came forth with the trumpets. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and the Levites, heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of the house being laid. Though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. Now, what did he say a chapter earlier? 200 male and female singers. Now look at Nehemiah. So both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me, right? All those people, right? You had those priests, Eliakim, Messiah, all those folks. Zechariah, he was there with trumpets. All those people were with trumpets, right? And after that, it says, and their singers sang with Jezrahiah's as their leader. Well, so these 245 singers mentioned in chapter 7, had a leader. It says the women and children also rejoice, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. You got two people saying that. The whole earth is at rest. They break forth into singing. Also, when it says that the fir trees and cedars of Lebanon sing their song that, oh, everything's okay now, in verse 8, what did chapter 2 say? The king gave timbers of wood to help rebuild the temple. So even the very temple itself, made of that wood and fir trees, are singing. Also, you have lots of commentaries: Ellicott, Benson, Gill, Joseph Alexander, Isaiah commentary. It's a commentary that just talks specifically about Isaiah. And this is the land had rest, is a phrase employed in the book of Judges. To describe the condition of their country after a great national deliverance. Anyway, so what is the conclusion? Esther was a queen. Nehemiah was made governor of Jerusalem by a Persian king, by the Persian king. Ezra and Nehemiah did work both inside and outside to rebuild the temple financed by the king. These facts yield no Persian captivity. Babylonians served as servants and handmaids of the Jews. These facts yield no future prophecy of slavery in the kingdom. Next time, I'm going to be talking about Ezekiel chapter 20. Because if proven fulfilled, the Sicarri stated in their video that they would take down their channel and disband. So that'll be the next video that I'm going to be talking about. Also, I'm going to be seeing if they want to have a dialogue with me of, are Gentiles lost Israelites of the northern kingdom? I'd like to have a dialogue with you about that, Sicarri. Hopefully you don't find some kind of reason to say no, which I know that you could come up with just about any reason. You can come up with any one. But I like for you to be a man of your word, and let's have a dialogue about that. Same way, same time, 3-minute intervals, or if you just want to back and forth, that's fine. Will the rapture be by spaceships? Why do I say this? Because when I actually looked on their website, Exodus 17:15, there is a little area where you can actually buy some music. And one said there was an album called, now get this, from spaceships to from slave ships to spaceships. So yes, I believe that one that we were all in high school back in the late 1990s. We would all look at the History Channel. We would see like those real actually spaceships, and so I guess I guess they haven't come a long way yet. And also, I'm going to be doing another video on what makes you a Jew. Yes, I'm just going to rehash the same information I had from before because there are no seen thus far. But yeah, people still shout about this. That's all I have. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and look at the chat. And after that, pretty much just going to close this out. And so I hope that was like, really edifying for y'all. Definitely hope it was. Let me go ahead and check the chat real quick. Want to check this out. Just give me a second here. Hold on. All right, where we at? Here we go. All right, let's see what's going down in the chat. All right, hold up. Okay, y'all. All right, hold up. I'm about to put you on screen real quick because I like to do that. So hold on. Put everybody on screen. Let's see what we got. Here we go. All right. All right. So see, I don't know anybody. I always like to go backwards. Let me see. He said Yahweh could make children of Abraham from rocks. Yep, that's definitely true. That is the reason why when Peter ends up speaking, he gets that same revelation that John got, John the Baptist. He said, look, we are spiritual stones built together to make a spiritual house, which gives spiritual sacrifices of praise, right? So, yeah, you're right. We are the rocks, the living stones that the Father made into children, into his children. Amen. That's right. Yep. Y'all on point. But see, this is the stuff that, the Sicarri, because they have such a one-dimensional view of the scriptures, they miss this stuff, right? Let me see. Now look into what Trina. He said, like, look into who's trying to decide who gets into heaven, who doesn't. Anyone who doesn't have Yeshua as their Mashiach and doesn't keep the commandments are not of Abraham's seed. Well, actually, it says that it's faith that makes you part of Abraham's seed, according to Galatians. And by the way, it's not keeping the commandments; it's actually keeping His commandments. That's what Christ said, to keep His commandments. Christ gave commandments that Moses never did. There are plenty of examples of that. Let me see. As did Seth, Cain, and Abel in his incarnate form, subordinate. Man, y'all be everywhere. Israel has the same seed as Edom. I don't understand how people can say one had righteous blood and the other didn't when they had the same percentage. Yeah, I mean, it's really not even your blood itself that makes you righteous. It's the things that you do. You know what I mean? But I do see what you're saying. He said, right, the Father is the head of Christ, blah, blah. He said the land had rest when he said Gedaliah, ruler of Judah, that remained in the land after Babylonian captivity, left him in charge. Wow. Nice. Okay. And Jesus is subject to the Father, blah, blah, blah. Yep. Let me see. Well, yeah, I mean, especially in his human nature, not his divine nature. Let me see. It said Christ is a bridegroom, church is a bride. Made the remarriage possible since Elohim had to divorce his people according to blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, I mean, a remarriage, yeah, that means like, the marriage supper of the Lamb. So anybody that's a Christian, be they Jew or Gentile, they're in Christ. So, yeah. That's why I guess for the Jews it's a remarriage, but not for Gentiles like us. Let me see. Yep, Christianos. Esther was queen. Mordecai was pretty much a ruler of the Jews. Were allowed to defend themselves and kill all enemies and take their spoil. What a servitude, Deacon Hakah. Hey, whoever Jeremiah 15 is, man, I seen him in my comment section, man. This dude been cutting boys up. Oh, shoot. Let me see. Man. Jesus, as he typed, walked in Torah. We should walk as he walked, according to John, 1 John 2:6. Yep. Walked as he walked. Yes, that's talking about like his commandments and the things that he had commanded. And also he went around healing the sick and raising the dead and, looking after the widow and the orphans by raising their children from the dead and things. So yeah, that's one way that Christ walked. Actually, that's like the majority way that he walked. It's very little that you actually hear Christ, keeping the commandments and things like that. We know that he did because, well, he was prophesied to keep the law. But when you look at what the apostles wrote about him, they didn't write a lot of times about Jesus. Well, and Jesus kept the Sabbath. No, they said he broke Sabbath. And Jesus kept the dietary law. He didn't eat unclean meat. Well, yeah, it didn't say he didn't eat unclean meat. Of course, he never did eat unclean meat. He had to fulfill the law. But then what was his instructions? It's not anything that goes into you that makes you unclean. It's what comes out of you that makes you unclean. And the things he named that made you unclean were not food. They were things that came from your heart. So that's the reason why, you have such a scriptures that are against the dietary law like that in the New Covenant. Romans chapter 14 being the biggest one. Let me see. Exact counterpart of the KKK. Oh, man. Man, yo. 28, when Jacob was renamed after the long wrestling match, that has spiritual innuendos. Wow. All right. Tell the Sicarri whom ssoreal is addressing this, then blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Must be on a label. Skin color. Yeah, I don't know, man. But yeah, man, I just want to give a shout out, man. Levi Khan, Jeremiah 15:16, Melchizedekian order of Jeshurun. God bless you guys. I really appreciate you guys. Let me see. Good night and good luck. Wow, brothers, you guys are kicking against the pricks. There will be slavery in the kingdom. Yeah, Robert Keys, you're gonna have to prove that. So, Levi Khan, I would love to do that. Yes, let's discuss the Book of James. I would love to do that. Oh, cool. And maybe we could discuss Galatians as well. I wouldn't mind walking through that with you. Yeah, we could do that sometime. Let me see. Book of James, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Oh, right. To all 12 tribes scattered abroad. Author knew who they were and where they were. They never lost their identity. Yeah, that's definitely true. It says, I believe in Acts 13 that the 12 tribes offer sacrifices to God, day and night. So, since you know what to eat and what not to eat, according to Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, your heart isn't right if you go against this. Well, if Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 are strictly old covenant laws, statutes and commandments, as the Black Hebrew Israelites would say, then that means that they're not a part of what's in the new covenant. So, plus you have, Hebrews 9 verses 15 through 17 that says that you're actually redeemed from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. So when you actually come under the mediator of the new covenant, it says you're redeemed from those transgressions. Why? Because of the new covenant itself. In other words, these things that are under the new covenant that were once sins, right? Don't eat that meat. Okay, those are no longer sins, Let me see. He said, I'd like to discuss Satan's fall with you. Sure. Once again, I'm looking forward to discussions. That is absolutely fine. Maybe we could try to do something tomorrow and then throughout, the week. He said, it's a renewed covenant. So real. Levi Khan, I've already explained to you that it's not a renewed covenant. I mean, would you like me to do it again? Matter of fact, let me pull something up for you real quick. I'll go ahead and do this for you right now. This whole renewed covenant thing. Said in a future setting, Jesus' fulfillment, he didn't simply do it. I learned. And oh well, thank you, John. I appreciate that, bro. I try. Let me address this renewed covenant thing. If you guys want to, you guys could definitely look up a video talking about refuting the TS 1998 and 2009, the scriptures Bible translations. You guys could look that up and kind of watch me go through it. But for right now, I'll go through this whole renewed covenant. Just give me a second. Just want to go ahead and pull this up. So let's get this here. So let's go ahead and look at this real quick, okay? Now, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, obviously, but I'm going to go through the part of contention. So let's pull this up. Let's get this here. Boom. Stop. Now, the Hebrew rooters, such as Yehukanan, who actually introduced me to the TS 2009, and the Basora, and the Sefer. Oh, man. And, if you guys actually look at reviews for these Bibles or terrible translations, the reviews are like, oh, my gosh. Like, you should not want to touch these at all. Look up the reviews. I don't care if you go on Amazon. I don't care if you go on just actual Jewish roots, websites. Actually reviews the stuff about this. Look up a guy named 52 Blades of Ben Stanhope. Ben Stanhope. Look that guy up. He has a blog about the Sefer, and you should see what he does. The Sefer, the Besora, the scriptures. Just terrible stuff. You shouldn't even want to touch it when it's 9.5 foot pole. So let me go ahead and go through this real quick. Show you something about this whole renewed covenant, right? Present to everyone. All right. So take a look at the outside or inside of your TSR. You'll notice that there's no translators, right? You won't find it because there are no real translators. The Hallelujah scriptures and the scriptures, like pretty much the same thing. A guy named C.J. Coster was one of the people that apparently involved, right? He basically wrote a book called Come Out of Her, My People. Does this sound familiar to you? All the Hebrew root stuff. And you know who else said that? I showed it in one of my videos, showing that during the times of the 1840s with the Millerite movement and the Seventh-day Adventists, there was a guy named Charles, no, not Charles Finch. That's an African dude. But there was a guy with a last name named Finch or Fitch, and he had preached a sermon called "Come Out of Her, My People." So, where are these doctrines coming from? Seventh-day Adventists and Millerites that were picked up by the Hebrew roots movement, that were picked up by everybody else, right? All right, so let's go ahead and look at this whole renewed covenant thing, okay? Let's see. Just gonna go through this. Now, this is what you'll notice. The ISR changes the doctrine to fit their renewed covenant theology by changing the words and meanings that were written in the Greek and the Hebrew manuscripts. Look at the KJV. It says New Testament. Look at the scriptures. It says renewed covenant. And look at the Textus Receptus, which they actually say that they derived their Greek and Hebrew from. It says what? Kainus. That means new. That means they looked at their own manuscript that they referenced them, and it says problem. Okay, that's an issue. Here's another thing. When you look up these words new and renewed in the Hebrew and the Greek, this is what you find. In the Greek, it is G341. It is anakainu. That means to renew. And now in the Greek, you have kainus. That's an adjective. It means new. Then all of a sudden you have, in the Hebrew, you have kadash, which means to renew. And then you have kadash. That means new thing, fresh. How much more plain can that get? Now, the reason why it says new thing, fresh, is because it is not renew. Matter of fact, when you look it up, it is actually new cut, right? Now, here's the thing. They, I believe this is from the TS 1998 explanatory note, which nobody can find. In other words, they wrote gibberish in there that you actually can't find being backed up by scripture, which is the reason why I showed you those terms. This is what they say that literally can't be backed up by anything. It says this: two Greek words, neos and kainos, have been rendered as new in almost all translations. The latter's meaning differs from the former. How can the latter differ from the former if they've been rendered as new? And is derived from the verb kainu, which means to make new. Let me see something real quick. Let me go back. To make new. Kainu, to make new. Let's see. It says kainos and anakainu. Now, and what did he say? It says the verb kainu, which means to make new. Wait a minute. If I look at here, it says kahinos. Right? Kahinos. That means new. So he has his Greek like wrong, it seems. Like, kainu, it means to make new. No, like kainu just means new. Kainus, new. Anakainu means to renew. So you see what I'm saying? Look at what it says here in Brown Jaffers Briggs for the Hebrew word. It says to be new, renew, repair. To renew, make anew, repair, to renew oneself. That's what it says. Kadash 2318. Right? And look, it is not 2319. 2319 is new thing, fresh. 2318 says renew. Let me go back. Hello, it's not responding. Oh, here we go. Look at this. Strong's to be new, causatively, to rebuild, renew, repair. Let's see here. So here's a problem. If you actually have this whole thing pushed throughout the whole thing, this is what you have. These are actual translations. You can see it butchers the English, but they don't care. This is like in the TS 2009 right now. This is what it says. Now, tell me if this makes sense. Let me just pick at a few. Let me see. A renewed commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. Time out. Renewed. That means to take what was once gone and restore it. Right? In other words, it's saying that, well, something that was at 0 is no longer at 0. It's at -5. Oh, I want to renew -5 back to 0. So that way you should be right where you started. Therefore, there should be nothing new. You're only going to renew what has already been. If I want to renew my shoes, oh, they're like new. That does not mean I have new shoes. No, they're the same shoes. I just have them as when I first had them when they were new. In other words, there's no change. They're the same shoes. There's a restoration, hence renew. How in the world can you get a renewed commandment that is not a commandment in the old covenant? The old covenant said, hey, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus said, I give you a new commandment. Love people like I loved you. That's new. Now check this out. Here's another one. Who also made us competent as servants of a renewed covenant, not of the letter. Wait a minute, but the old covenant was of the letter. So if you're going to renew that old covenant of the letter, how is this renewed covenant of the Spirit? Oh, it must be new, not renewed. Therefore, there shouldn't be anything different. But there is. It says that it's not of the letter, but it's of the Spirit. Well, the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. It doesn't make sense. Check this out. Therefore, if anyone is in Messiah, he is a renewed creature. Wait a minute. Whatever creature I was before, I'm just being restored to that same creature. I'm now renewed. Nothing different happening. And all of a sudden it says, look, the old matters have passed away. All matters have become renewed. Wait, how can something be renewed if old matters have passed away? The old is what I originally was, but for some reason I decayed. But now I'm going to be renewed. What? To that old matter, because I'm not being new. I'm just renewed. I'm restored to back to where I was. Therefore, there's really nothing new about me. But yet somehow these old matters have passed away. Like, it doesn't make sense. Now look at this. I mean, you could just go on and on. Oh man. Here, I'll show you my most famous one. Check this out. Revelation 21. And I saw a renewed heaven and a renewed earth. For the former heaven and the former earth had passed away. Now, wait a minute. If the earth that we got now and the heaven that we got now is just renewed, where's it going? How's it going to pass away? I mean, for it to pass away, that means that something new would have to be there. Not renewed. This heaven and this earth, this ain't going nowhere. We're just going to refurbish it like an old computer. So how is this like going away? And the sea was no more? How is that possible when the sea is supposed to be renewed? Like all this, like it doesn't make sense. Oh man. How can you renew what is passed away? Go figure. Then you have a mediator of a renewed covenant, so that death having taken place for the redemption of the transgressions committed under the first covenant, those who are called my. Okay, how can you redeem people with a renewed covenant if the meaning of a renewed covenant means to renew the covenant that you first made? It makes sense, right? Revelation 21. How can you renew what is passed away? Go figure. I don't know. I mean, it just, how can a renewed Jerusalem coming down from heaven not be a restored earthly Jerusalem? How can the book of Hebrews preach better promises if everything is just renewed? So this idea of a renewed covenant, it doesn't make sense. I mean, look at the scriptures for the TS 9090. It says this, and he said to them, therefore, every scholar taught in the reign of the heavens is like a householder who brings out his treasure, renewed and old. You know, the original says new and old. Are you serious? Like, how is something renewed not the same as the old? This is the TS 1998. This is in the scriptures right now. I have it on my eSword. I can pull it up. It doesn't make sense. And they shall speak with renewed tongues. So I guess tongues was part of the old, I guess. I don't know. So you'll have a renewed language entirely. How does this not contradict Acts 2? And just, speaking in tongues spiritually. How does I don't get it. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know. We await for a renewed heaven and a renewed earth in which righteousness dwells. Since when did the heavens and earth need renewed? Did something go wrong? A renewed earth is not a better promise anyway. I mean, we could say something went wrong in earth, but heaven, no way. So I don't know. It just, man, like, let me see. It's so hard to just skip all this stuff. On a stone, a renewed name written, which no one knows except him. No, wait a minute. A renewed name which no one knows except him who receives it. So how's no one going to know except me if I'm just getting my name renewed? If I renew my license, is there anything different about it? No. And if I get my name renewed, how does no one know it if it's just renewed and not something new? I'm going to give you this renewed name that no one knows except the person who receives it, which would be you. Right. I don't know. So, man, look at this. They sang a renewed song. A remix. How can people sing a renewed song that no one has ever heard of before? Remember, listen, I man, how can you learn a renewed song? I mean, it just, I don't know. Oh my gosh. Look, all right, this is the last thing I'm doing. After that, I'm shutting this down, okay? Because this is getting too long. I took the Webster's 1828 dictionary, and this is what it means to renew, okay? It comes from the Latin renovo, re and novo, or re and new. To renovate, to restore to a former state, or to a good state, after decay or deprivation. To rebuild, kind of like the temple that we just got talking about, how they rebuilt it, right? To repair. Asa renewed the altar before the Lord, right? 2 Chronicles 15. To reestablish, to confirm. Let us go up to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 3. To make again, as to renew a treaty or covenant. To repeat, as to renew expressions of friendship, to renew a promise, to renew an attempt, to revive. It's funny because when you look at Abraham, God did like renew a covenant with him. In Genesis 15, they made a covenant and all he had to do was like kind of pass through all the animals that he sliced in half. But he didn't do it because Abraham fell into a deep sleep. Read Genesis 15. But guess who passed through it? God passed through it. And it says that he actually passed through it as a smoking flax and like a kindle of fire. Isn't that the same kind of elements that led Israel out of Egypt? And it says, everyone knows that once you pass through those animals, you're basically saying, you know what? Whatever happened to that animal, if I don't keep my word, Let it happen to me too. So if God passed through those animals, that's God himself literally saying, look, if I don't keep my promise to you, Abraham, you know what I'm saying? Then cut me in half. So even the first covenant, God made it complete, which means that Abraham fully depended on God because he didn't like go through there. So he had to depend on God to be faithful, not himself. He couldn't say, I'll pass through this, so therefore I'm going to make sure I do what I need to do. No. So you know what? God, we started out making a covenant and I fell into a deep sleep, but you passed through it, but yet you still want to have this covenant with me, which means that even if I kind of covenant with you, I got to be, dependent on you to give me mercy because you're the one that passed through it and kept your word. So I got to depend on your mercy. Genesis 15, God makes covenant with Abraham. You pretty much know what happened. It didn't fully he didn't walk through it. But then 2 chapters later in Genesis 17, he makes another one. He renews it. He said, look, this time we're going to do circumcision. So there's the example. Anyway, it says the last great age renews its finished course to make new, to make fresh and vigorous as to renew youth, to renew strength, to renew the face of the earth. Psalms 103, Isaiah 40. In theology, to make new, to renovate, transform, to change from natural entity to the love of God and his law, to implant holy affections in the heart, to regenerate. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. There it is. That's what renew means. And you know what's funny? The only correct reference of renew is when the KJV actually uses the word renew. And it's talking about Christians that are in the new covenant. And he's saying, look, you got to have your mind renewed. Why? Because they ended up being corrupted by sin. And now, you know what? It's time for you to repent. Come on, have your mind renewed. You're a new creature, but you're going back to those old habits. You gotta renew your mind. Why? Because you're under a new covenant. When you went from old to new, your mind and your body, everything was new. The Bible says that you were a new creature. Obviously, if you're going to go ahead and sin to the point where you're like, oh man, I need to repent and renew my mind. To what state? The new covenant state, not the old covenant. The only reason you can renew is because you have first been made new. Oh my gosh, that was fresh from heaven. Oh my gosh. Man, oh man. Let me check the chat. This is that's a whole nother hangout. Sorry. All right. With that being said, I'm gonna close this out. I just had to get that out. Sorry, I had to do it. Had to do it. What y'all talk? Let me see. Man. He said, in my 2009, it doesn't have the word renewed so real. Well, you know what? The one I got on my eSword does. The one that I be looking up online do. You know. So, man. I wonder what those acts are. Notice that they're all moral, right? I suppose if I try to explain once in panels, I'll bounce. Well, seeing it, I've never muted or bounced you. I don't know why you would assume that. I'm seeing it. The English isn't proper with the grammar. However, loving your neighbor Let's see. Oh man, what in the world? I don't know why it does this. Okay, that was weird. Test 1, 2. Okay, that's the second time that happened. I don't know why, but it just keeps on going in and out. That's the second time it happened. So therefore, I'm gonna go ahead and shut this down before something else happens. Let me see. He said, even though I disagree with ssoreal on this, ultimately the renewed covenant argument is very weak. Well, I'd like to hear your, let me see. The renewed argument is very weak. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is. Let me see. The renewed covenant argument is, I admit it is weak. Just makes mincemeat of the Bible. So let me see. Along with Jeremiah 31. Uh, yeah, that's funny because in Jeremiah 31, guess what? In Jeremiah 31, in the TS 2009 in the scriptures, it says renewed covenant. But then in Hebrews 8, where it quotes Jeremiah 31, it says new covenant. So they forgot to actually, they forgot to renew that word there. They kind of let that one slip. Man. And I indeed need to explain accurate interpretation. All right, well, look, Levite Khan, whoever else, thank you so much, Beatrice. Peace and blessings, y'all. Levi Khan says I have the 2009 revised edition. In other words, I guess that 2009 one and the 1998 one, they kind of made some slips, and they're like, dang, we're getting like we really made some mistakes. Let's clean up our act. It's kind of like the same thing that the New World Translation is doing with the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was always afraid that one day they would actually, tidy up and kind of tighten up their translation, because a lot of Christian apologists just made mincemeat of the New World Translation. I mean, it was terrible. I'm gonna get out of here. I gotta go. I hope that this has been like edifying for people. When it comes to the Sicarri, like I said, they have no godly idea what they're talking about. And like I said, I could do this to their doctrines all day. Other than that, that's all I have to say. I'm out. I look forward to any future dialogues that I have with them. If they refuse, if they say, look, for whatever reason they desire, they just say, well, no, not going to talk to you no more. Well, I'm just going to go and continue to show the false doctrines in their videos, which pretty much covers all One West doctrine, because, they're just a break off of GMS anyway. Ironically, who I just got done talking to today. Pray for them brothers too. All right, y'all. I'm out. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings.